Hey everyone, before we get into this episode of The Overlook, I want to tell you about a brand new podcast that's all about Asheville, only each episode is under 5 minutes long. It's a daily radio-styled newscast called Wake Up Asheville. It's a morning podcast updating you on all the important local headlines. We check in with every credible local news source, then boil it all down to what you need to know in under 5 minutes. It's designed to tell you what you need to know and let you get on with your day. There's even a Spanish language version called Despierta Asheville. Wake Up Asheville and Despierta Asheville are both free and available every weekday morning wherever you get your podcasts.
I am a maker, a builder, a baker, although sometimes my messes are all that you'll find. I'll tell a story, both true and allegory. Oh, the process is precious, so it takes up all my time.
Very little of today's River Arts District resembles how the region looked and felt even 15 years ago. Back then, it cost more to rehab an old warehouse than it did to buy it. It wasn't difficult for artists to find and rent studios. It wasn't as if they had much competition. Today, with hotels, restaurants, bars, and hundreds of new apartments on the near horizon, artists and arts organizations who revitalize the RAD are undeniably getting squeezed out.
Who owns the buildings in the River Arts District, and are they going to be in a position where they would feel comfortable transferring that wealth and that asset for artists to continue being a great part of the district? Or are they going to be in a position where someone comes in and says, I'll give you $6 million for your building?
It's hard to turn something like that.
It is hard to, just being realistic.
This is The Overlook with Matt Peiken, a podcast about the news, arts, issues, and trends of Asheville, North Carolina. Today is the second half of my conversation with Hedy Fischer and Gail McCarthy, who along with their artist husbands bought buildings in the RAD early on and are committed to keeping those buildings open and affordable for other artists. They're joined here by Stephanie Monson Dahl, the city's manager of urban design, place strategies, and long-range planning. If you missed the first part of our conversation, dial back a notch in your podcasting app to listen to that one first before tuning in here. Today, we talk about concerns of losing artists in the RAD and strategies for keeping them there. We talk about conversations city leaders are having around land equity with the Southside neighborhood and how artists could potentially migrate there. We also get into the stakes for the RAD and all of Asheville if the state takes away the city's ability to regulate short-term rentals. We pick up our conversation right where we left off in part one. Stephanie, you said that there are certain incentives to keep a certain percentage of these new units affordable.
It's not the percentage. It's if they want to add on additional units and say, by right, I'm allowed to do 4 stories in this area, but I really would like to do something bigger. We will allow that. That's a bonus on them. And if they do that, then we're going to require that they're affordable units. So that's the incentive piece of it. In the state of North Carolina, we cannot require anyone to do a certain percentage of their units as affordable units.
You can't use that as a carrot.
So it is a carrot. So it's a carrot to say, you know what, you want to be bigger? We'll allow you to be bigger, but it has to serve a real public purpose.
I'm just wondering how many of these developments from the Radview, Wire, 179 Riverside, and Stoneyard, have any of those taken advantage of that offer?
So originally, most of them were taking advantage of it, but it is really difficult to develop in this area. I'm going to give you an example for the Wire, right? Underneath the Wire was a 200-year-old stormwater drainage system that had been hand-built, and just 200 is exaggerating, over 100. And if anybody remembers the sinkholes that were happening at All Souls up the street, like we all know what's going on, like the amount of money and work that developer put in to make sure that area, which had been used as an industrial facility and was contaminated, was really significant. And there is a balance here of asking private developers to help with the biking, help with the parking, help with the environmental contamination, fix all of the stormwater that's underneath it, and then say, and additionally, we want you to do affordable units. So I want to just put that out there that a lot of the developers are already doing things that are making this place more sustainable for the next 100 years. And that's a trade-off. But some of these folks are, I believe, the new residences, which are, 144 and 159 Riverside, I think 5%, which doesn't sound like a lot. But, if they end up doing over 200 units, then there's some
10 units, 10 to 15 units or so. I was just curious, not that it has to be an either or on infrastructure or affordable housing. I was just curious. Right. I appreciate you giving me that context, that there's a lot of work that goes into making these new buildings habitable by current code and current standards. I understand that. Right. You mentioned that your department was concerned first about the first word of River Arts District. That was initially, we got to think about the river and what, potential flooding and other elements of that. The second word of this is the arts. And Gail and Hedy, you both got in, you and your husbands got in early on the River Arts District before it became as expensive as it is now. You talked about, Hedy, how you don't even pay attention to what other people are charging. I'm just curious, have developers come to you and wanted to purchase your buildings?
Not seriously yet. I'll say yet. I get fishing, but I don't think they're serious. They're looking for bottom feeding.
So now, you said you've had some tenants since the beginning. Maybe that's perfectly fine. I'm wondering, though, as you both are aware that more and more artists are getting pushed out, are you concerned that I know Katie Cornell over at Arts AVL has been concerned that we are going to lose the arts in River Arts District? The Magnetic Theater is gone. I know individual artists who've had to move or shuffle their spaces. Are you concerned that we are losing the arts from the River Arts District the way things are going?
I would say, I think I'm a little older than you are, I would say that the one thing that would happen would be our death. Because someone will come to our heirs and say, I'll buy this building. We have, and I know you two have as well, Hedy, we have a personal commitment and desire, need, whatever it is, to be doing what we're doing. But that could change.
I know with land, there's conservation easements, right? You can have land trusts built in. Could you do that for your properties, or would you even do this to make it where in perpetuity, our buildings are locations for affordable workspaces? Is that something you're interested or could do?
I don't know if there's anything available like that out there. I've never heard of it if there is, not even if you start a foundation.
A nonprofit, a foundation, something like that.
I don't know anything like that would enable those buildings to stay art studios in perpetuity. But I agree 100% with Gail. So many of the buildings in the River Arts District are owned by people that are of retirement age already.
This is an enormous deal. We call it the Great Turnover.
The Great Turnover. And at least Gail and Brian have children to turn it over to. Randy and I don't. So,
do you want to adopt me?
You want to run a pink dog? It's yours.
Really?
Well, another point of this, though, and is many of the artists that own these buildings, they are growing older. And as you said, Gail, there's this potentially at some point you will pass on. Also, many of these people are artists, and they didn't have traditional jobs that said that you have a pension or a 401k or any of these other kind of investments. So thinking about this might be their only asset for their retirement. Some maybe not, but yes, there are ways to put buildings and land in trusts, basically, to put them in trusts or to start not-for-profits, but you also have to endow that not-for-profit to be able to afford to
stay that way.
So it's one thing, it's not going to be legally binding. You can't put on a deed necessarily and make it work. Like, this shall stay an artist studio forever. And so that's like a taking of some sort. But there are ways that we could look at mechanisms to keep those buildings owned by artists. I think that is one of the strategies that people have been talking about, to say if we want to keep the arts in the Arts District. By the way, the city absolutely wants to keep the River Arts District. We would like the river to stay, and we would like the artists to stay.
That's encouraging.
So do you think that the city would be interested in, I don't know if you've even talked about it, but now that we're talking about this, in trying to come up with some new innovative plan where they could make that possible and workable.
I think the city's main assets for mechanisms like this is to provide additional brain power resources and to help act as a convener for different partners. So as an example, the city really spearheaded the creation of the Asheville Buncombe Community Land Trust that now exists today. And that was in 2014 after the creation of a report about gentrification, especially in the Southside neighborhood, just adjacent to the River Arts District, which we can talk about, by the way. But we said, we don't necessarily have the money. We're not going to endow this community land trust with $5 million to just make it happen. But we can hold all the meetings, record all the minutes, bring in experts, have those conversations to think about what is a way for us to try to
What
make
would
it
take?
Yes,
Yeah.
The city also has land in the River Arts District. And so I see my role moving forward as being a part of the conversation about how the city stewards that land so that we continue supporting the vibrancy of the River Arts District.
Yeah. You mentioned we could talk about Southside. I had members of the Southside Neighborhood Association in here, and they lamented how River Arts District gets, from their vantage, a lot of attention, and they feel neglected. That River Arts District used to be part of what Southside was a previous name. I can't remember what the name of Southside was, but anyway, it was all one district.
Southside was just a very large area. It was the south side of our town. So it included everything from the East End Valley Street neighborhood, the entire area of what now many people call the South Slope, everything that now that the Southside United Neighborhood Association is a part of. And yes, a lot of the River Arts District, especially that section of Depot Street, right? A lot of Black businesses in the area, an amazing history and legacy there. And the city's been having conversations with leaders in the Southside United neighborhood to talk about that investment that they're looking for. What Southside United did this year that's really important is that they came together and they created the vision for the neighborhood. And it's a plan on a page, and it explains what they want to see and how they want to get there. Now we can have those conversations. The difference with the River Arts District is that neighborhood, the River Arts District, there already were plans. There were plans from the 1980s, and then I mentioned the Wilma Dykeman Riverway Master Plan that was created by Riverlink, or commissioned by Riverlink and created by others as a community effort. That's part of planning, right? Is that you have to be able to get together and put on a piece of paper what it is you want to see. And Southside has done that. And now it's their time.
You're saying they've done that recently?
They've done that this year.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm wondering if there's talk, you mentioned Depot Street, and that's a bridge between River Arts District and Southside. Is there any talk about, and with artists and building owners, hey, let's collaborate, let's try to expand into what is now Southside, which is still undervalued?
There has been for years, and I want Hedy to talk about this a little bit because she's got some background, but I'll just say there's conversation about just like in physical spaces, making sure that we put more neighborhood branding up for the Southside neighborhood and maybe pushing it up Depot Street a little bit. But years ago, I mean, a decade or more, there were folks that they started a fund called One Neighborhood. And there was a fundraiser every year to support sending youth from the Southside neighborhood to different arts classes in the River Arts District. And the idea was to break down those barriers and say, let's get parents and their children into these studios and create a space for them.
Yeah. So, Hedy, what are you aware of trying to move or expand the River Arts District into what is now Southside?
When we bought the building that became Pink Dog, we were very aware that we were the bridge, in a sense, between what has primarily been a white artists' district and a Black neighborhood. And we consciously have tried to program Pink Dog in such a way that it would act as a bridge and act as a safe space. And we did that by having Black artists in our studios. We have a Black-owned coffee shop. And if you go into the Grind, It's one of the few places in all of Asheville where you'll see Black and white people in there having meetings and working on their computers and sitting and drinking coffee and interacting. We also sponsored Youth Arts Empowered, which was Cleesta Cotton's project.
Right.
And she would bring kids from Southside neighborhoods and do art classes and enable them to have exhibitions in our gallery. And their parents and their cousins and their aunties and their neighbors would all come to Pink Dog and see their children's art up on the walls. And it created a hope, a safe space for people that wanted to be in there.
That building existed before you bought it, though, right?
It did.
So one of the things I'm wondering, Stephanie, is it seems like what's happened, Gail and Brian and Hedy and Randy and other developers took buildings that already existed and did something with them. Is Southside equipped? Are there already buildings there that could be refurbished, reused, or would it have to be new development? I look at the new community center. What's the name of that community center?
The Grant.
The
Grant.
Dr. Wesley Grant.
It's fantastic.
Sure.
It's a fantastic new building, a community center there. You talked about Riverside being a catalyst for development. I'm wondering, could that community center, and there seems to be land near or kind of in the area. Am I naive about this? Could that be a catalyst?
That is for the neighborhood to decide, first of all, in the Southside neighborhood. I don't think the Southside neighborhood has gotten into granular level detail about the kind of new development they want to see and whether or not they want to have a focus on commercial development that would support their own economic development. That would be really important. What they're focusing on, honestly, on right now, some of it is anti-gentrification. So displacement is a massive issue for us throughout the city, but especially in our legacy neighborhoods. And then they're also focusing on reclaiming their public spaces and making sure that they tell their narrative through their own words and not through like white people's words or the city's words or whomever. And so that looks like taking the historic Walton Street Park and the former pool area and doing storytelling and narratives in that and figuring out how that can best serve the community. The same thing along with partnership on either the Nasty Branch historic interpretation or the Black Cultural Heritage Trail that Buncombe County TDA finished last year. There's a lot in the news right now about the Southside Community Garden and whether or not that is going to stay. And that's at the Eddington Center right now. So they're really looking at public and community spaces and less at that private development at this moment.
And there's also Blue Note Junction, which is what Dwayne
in Burton
Barton's
Street. Yeah, that's a fantastic emerging project.
More after this. When you go to an Asheville City Soccer Club game, you'll see some of the best emerging talent from all over North Carolina, but also you'll see players from around the world trying to better their games and work their way up the professional soccer circuit.
Having players from different countries, from different areas, it brings different kind of styles of play into the mix.
Brooke Bingham is the coach of the women's team.
Soccer is a very creative sport, so I want to encourage them to play in their style. The aspiration for the players comes from within themselves. They kind of dictate that, and we kind of help them and we push them into the direction they want to go.
Homegrown athletes like Laura Greb say playing with and against players with rich soccer traditions elevates her game.
You have players who grew up in Central or South America, and they're more poised on the ball sometimes. They great first touches, excellent vision.
To see soccer with international flair, dial into the Asheville City Soccer Club men's and women's teams. Home games are at Greenwood Field on the UNC Asheville campus. For details, visit AshevilleCitySC.com. How important is it, do you think, Stephanie, or any of you? I know this is something the city can't control, is whether the legislature mandates that we can't control Airbnbs, that if people want to turn their residences into short-term vacation rentals, right now, Asheville doesn't allow that within Asheville City proper, unless you live in the unit itself, and you can rent out a bedroom or an apartment within it as long as it's your main residence. Are you worried that the legislature could make it where the city doesn't have that power? And if that does happen, does that forever change what happens in the RAD, and not to mention other neighborhoods in this city?
From a policy perspective, I think it would be extraordinarily detrimental if the state changed the legislation so that the city and the county and others could not dictate more rules for short-term rentals. If you take a look at that list of residential projects that have popped up in the last 4 years or so, you start to see that some of those are right on VRBO or Airbnb. Some of them were permitted earlier and they are technically legal. And some of these, they're advertising them as 30-day rentals, which is allowed.
Gets around the code.
It gets around it. I'm not sure. We have enforcement. Y'all, we're not the STR. That's not what we get up every day to do. It's a big issue, but we don't have a group of 30 people out there doing it. But yeah, the ability to make money off of short-term rentals is very attractive, apparently.
And also, I've talked to people who own some of them. There are so many in the marketplace that they're not seeing the returns on them that they used to see.
Yeah. Yes, I've heard that. I've also heard our residential market is softening. I know several real estate brokers who pretty much the past 6 months, their business has just dropped off, so the market is always going to change, but Asheville is never going to be unattractive to people. We all know that we are in a global market, but we're certainly in a national market for housing, and that locals here are just going to get consistently beat out as far as making an offer when someone can come in from a different market and they've sold their home. And now I think we're seeing people here do the same. This ties back to having a conversation about who owns the buildings in the River Arts District, and are they going to be in a position where they would feel comfortable transferring that wealth and that asset for artists to continue being a great part of the district? Or are they going to be in a position where someone comes in and says, I'll give you $6 million for your building?
It's hard to turn something like
it is hard to, just being
when
realistic.
You're in your retirement year age.
You have
That's why I asked you if Hedy, if people had given you offers, because I would imagine you and Randy at a certain point look at each other. Okay, you don't have kids, and maybe it's our time to say yes, step aside, and do that. I'm just wondering, given your vantage points, you both, Gail and Hedy, you both stamped your place in the River Arts District when there wasn't a River Arts District. There wasn't such a demand for land and real estate there. Now it's through your own ethos that you're keeping it affordable. I'm wondering, what are your outlooks for the RAD? What do you think is the future 5-10 years from now? Is it a place that's still going to be a home for vibrant local arts? What do you both think, just from your vantage of being there for decades?
I would say that what we have, we've made a commitment to that. And there is no control over that. Now, perhaps we're on the cusp of having an opportunity to partner, I don't know, with the city or with, I have no idea what. And if we've decided as a community that this is something worth an endurance to go down in history somehow or other, maybe we're on the cusp of it almost being too late to explore.
There are buildings that are designated historical landmarks that can't be changed or developed. I wonder if there's a different kind of landmark designation that could be, I don't know.
Yeah, there are some wonderful things that you can do to preserve the architecture, but if we're talking about preserving people and the ability for artists to enjoy that architecture, that is a whole different preserving use is just very different. And so the Riverside Industrial District is part of that. And there are buildings that are contributing buildings. What's different about the River Arts District and downtown is that downtown has this national landmark district. People thrived using historic tax credits in order to renovate buildings downtown. None of that happened in the RAD. And that's because artists do not want to be told by the Department of Interior that they can't put up an awning that looks like this that they have to do it. Like, that is not going to fly.
But yet artists were key in bringing downtown back.
Absolutely. But I would say it was very different who actually renovated those buildings and did that preservation and used the tax credit than the artists that were creating the programming and the excitement and the vitality and acting as the entrepreneurs in downtown.
I've kept you here for an hour. I don't want to keep you too much longer. Is there anything we haven't talked about or talked about enough, or things you wanted to say?
I want to talk about something to see how you guys feel about this. When Matt's asking about the outlook for the River Arts District and how we keep the artists there, one of the things that I think is exciting is that, yes, it might be too expensive for people to just use a lot of those ground floor spaces for their studios, but what brings in revenue is classes, right? So yes, you want to have a mix of gallery and classes and studio and what have you, but there is this model at Odyssey that I think people should look into, which is if you have classes, the artists are still there. If you don't have classes and if you don't have studios, so maybe that could be something that we could look forward to. Chair caning. Okay.
The Ukrainian egg decorating.
Right.
Silversmithing.
And NC Glass Center, right? The reason they're able to stay there is because they're open to the public and they're able to have those classes. And that also brings in revenue because you can't just survive on selling coffee mugs.
Heck, this theater that we're in, the BB Theater, gets by because of classes. They have tons of classes.
So when people say, like, how do we keep the artists there? I just want to posit or put out there that might be one of the strategies that people move more towards is those classes. And people are already doing it. I'm not making this up. People are doing it. And it just needs to be brought to light. And maybe we can encourage some of our local folks. If you want to keep the River Arts District full of artists, hey, buy someone a gift certificate to go to Odyssey and to take a class or what have you.
I know there are artist co-ops. Have there been artist co-op building purchases in this region or in the RAD?
There's not artist co-ops, but the Wedge was purchased by a group of local people who really care about keeping artists in the district. And it's not the exact same group, but a different group of people purchased what is now Foundy or the Foundation Studios, and similarly curated the heck out of that area and said, we want artists to be here. So some of those people were artists, like Brent Stark was an artist. Correct. Some of them were not. They were lawyers, local developers,
architects.
Yeah, the creative types that really fit Asheville's mold. And people, and this is key to it, is like the more that we can have people who understand the district and like the actual DNA of the district, the more we have a shot at it sticking that way. So those people collectively own those buildings. It's not just one person.
I come from cities where at least some buildings were artist live work studios. They bought the building themselves when they could afford it. And they had the presence of mind to do that. I was just curious if there was any effort like that or talk around that here.
There was a place on Depot Street that was for sale, I think last year or the year before. I can't remember the address or what we call it, but it's a yellow building, right? That was one that I know there was a bunch of artists in the River Arts District who looked at it. And one of the challenges, again, is some of these buildings are 100 years old and they need considerable investment to rehab them and to make them safe. And so people can look at that building and say, what can I pool, right? You're an artist, maybe not a lot, but you also have another additional cost of maybe $100,000 or $200,000 just to...
Minimally.
Yeah, minimally. To just keep things the way they really are.
Yeah.
That's something for us to think about as again, I think this is all about community and partnerships. We have a lot of talented people here who do adaptive reuse and historic preservation and who support affordability. And if you put all those things together in a soup and make it an actual strategic effort instead of just waiting for something to fall from the sky to save us all, that would be productive. But to just talk, like if you go to a RAD meeting, like people are concerned about it and all of those things, but it takes work.
And it takes money. And there are only so many people who are fortunate enough to have the resources to do something like that. And they can't do it alone. You did it alone 40 years ago, 40, 50 years ago. It's hard to come in to do it alone now with the kind of cost with everything.
Absolutely. It needs to be like an organization, that not-for-profits. That's something for people to think about too. We're such a little community, but there are big national not-for-profits that have billions of dollars that really care about artists. And we're not necessarily plugging into those as a community very well right now. We haven't had to.
I mean, other than the already established, like the museums and
Absolutely.
Center for Craft and that sort of thing, they have people who can research granting organizations and write grants.
Build relationships with, yeah.
Whereas a group of artists, that's not what they do.
That's right. That's right.
Hedy and Gail, anything you want to close with that we haven't talked about or haven't talked about enough?
I see the possibility of an opportunity to, I'm not sure where to take it or how to make it work or how to get it started, but it seems to me that there is a time and a place and an opportunity before it becomes too late for the city, the artists, the building owners, the interested supporters, Riverlink to do or to start something that probably doesn't even exist today, but except a thought and a little light that's flickering there.
To do what? What are you talking about?
Preserve the river arts district.
Yeah. Check out, like, what is it? The Torpedo Factory outside of Washington, D.C. Check that out. That's a model, right, of a collective ownership that is maintaining our art spend.
Wanted to come to us and say, we'd like to buy the building from you, we would definitely be open to discussing that with them. No question.
I hope that happens at some point.
I hope it does too.
I'd like to thank my guests today, Hedy Fischer, Gail McCarthy, and Stephanie Monson Dahl. Our conversation happened at the BB Theater in downtown Asheville, which comes to me courtesy of the Asheville Contemporary Dance Theater and Susan and Giles Collard. If you value the Overlook's place in Asheville's media landscape, please consider joining dozens of others who are supporting the show through my Patreon crowdfunding page. Become a member for as little as $5 a month. Visit patreon.com/The Overlook Podcast. Our First Look newsletter gives you just a handful of daily headlines from around the local media landscape to get you on your morning. We also have a weekly newsletter devoted to all things The Overlook that hits you every Friday. Both are free and available at podavl.com/newsletter. The theme song for The Overlook, Maker's Song, comes to us courtesy of the Asheville duo The Resonant Rogues. The Overlook is a production of Podcast Asheville. New episodes come out every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on any social media channel at AVL Overlook. And I'll see you on the next episode of The Overlook with Matt Peiken.